A line of hopeful job seekers wound around the corner of Harrington Enterprises, the city's most powerful logistics company. Among them stood Marcus Reed, pressed shirt, worn shoes, resume folded carefully in his hand. For weeks he had searched for work, his mother's hospital bills piling up, rent overdue. Inside the marble lobby, Edward Harrington paced. His empire had been built on contracts with shipping magnates, his fortune carved from generations of privilege. He stopped when Marcus entered the interview room. His smile vanished. "Your resume is impressive," Edward said coldly. "But this company isn't the right place for someone like you." Marcus sat frozen. "Someone like me?" Edward leaned back, his voice low. "My clients expect a certain image. I can't put a colored man at the front of my operation." The word struck like a blow. Marcus's hands tightened around his resume until the paper wrinkled. He walked out in silence, heart pounding, humiliation burning through his veins. Outside, the rain began to fall, soaking the resume he once believed would change his life. Marcus trudged home, drenched, the rejection echoing in his mind. Neighbors nodded sympathetically. They knew the pattern. Harrington Enterprises had never hired a black worker in its century-long existence. That night, Marcus told his mother, bedridden and weary. She touched his hand. "You are more than their rejection. Promise me you'll keep fighting." Marcus promised. With doors closed, Marcus turned to night classes, working odd jobs, sweeping floors, unloading trucks, studying business on borrowed textbooks. Each rejection became fuel, every insult a spark. Amira, his childhood friend, reminded him, "Build your own table. One day they'll line up for a seat." Years passed. Marcus scraped enough to open a small delivery company. One van, one driver, himself. He painted his name on the side in bold letters, "Reed Logistics." Meanwhile, Edward Harrington's empire grew, but cracks appeared. His son, Daniel, lived recklessly, parties, gambling, debts. Edward dismissed it as youth, blind to the storm brewing. The city whispered of change. Black-owned businesses sprouted despite systemic barriers. Marcus delivered not only packages but hope, his reliability winning small clients. Each step forward was a silent victory. One evening, Marcus returned home to find a letter slipped under his door. A major distributor, once loyal to Harrington, was considering switching contracts. Marcus's name was on the shortlist. He froze, staring at the letter. The very empire that once humiliated him was vulnerable. The question was no longer if Marcus would rise. It was when. The letter sat on Marcus's kitchen table like a beacon. A distributor that had once partnered exclusively with Harrington Enterprises was now considering his small company. Marcus traced the embossed seal with his finger. Opportunity, real, tangible opportunity, had arrived. But it was not a guarantee. To stand a chance, Reed Logistics needed to prove it could handle larger contracts. And Marcus only had one van. That night, he couldn't sleep. His mind replayed Edward Harrington's words, "Someone like you." Each syllable cut into him, but now those same words ignited his determination. Marcus rose before dawn. He called Amira. "If I can't scale up, this chance will slip away. I need investors, more vans, drivers, everything." Amira believed in him. "Your track record is your best pitch. Show them your grit. The right people will see it." Marcus spent weeks preparing presentations, knocking on doors of small investors, community leaders, even churches. Many turned him down, skeptical that a black-owned company could survive against Harrington. But some saw his fire. With their modest backing, Marcus bought 2 used vans, hired 2 drivers, men who, like him, had once been turned away from opportunity. Every delivery was on time. Every handshake was firm. Marcus built a reputation brick by brick, package by package. Across town, Edward Harrington presided over his empire, still confident. His headquarters, a towering glass building, symbolized wealth and control. But inside, things weren't as smooth. Daniel, his son, was draining the company's finances. He gambled, borrowed against Harrington stock, and cut secret deals to cover debts. Whispers spread through the boardroom, the heir apparent was reckless, unfit. Edward dismissed the concerns. Daniel will learn, he insisted. He's my blood. The company will stay in the family. But loyalty to family could not erase the numbers. Losses mounted. Meanwhile, Reed Logistics won the contract. The distributor, tired of Harrington's arrogance, took a chance on Marcus. Marcus's company grew overnight. 3 vans became 5. 5 became 10. He hired dispatchers, accountants, and young men eager for work. He set strict rules, fairness, respect, and integrity, values he vowed to uphold after his own humiliation. One evening, Amira walked through the modest Reed Logistics office, watching workers laugh as they mapped routes. She turned to Marcus. "Look at this. You built something Harrington never could, loyalty." Marcus nodded. But deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. The moment Reed Logistics trucks rolled into districts once dominated by Harrington, Edward took notice. He called an emergency board meeting. "This man Reed is nothing but a pretender," Edward snarled. "We need to crush him." But crushing wasn't so easy anymore. Marcus's business model, community-driven, respectful, efficient, resonated with clients. Harrington, bloated and careless, could no longer guarantee the same service. Edward sent agents to smear Marcus's name. Rumors of incompetence, whispers of theft. But clients who knew Marcus dismissed the lies. His reputation was his shield. Daniel Harrington's life spun further out of control. He drank heavily, skipped board meetings, and racked up debts with dangerous people. One night, cornered by creditors in a shadowed alley, Daniel begged for more time. They warned him, "Your father's name won't protect you forever." Desperate, Daniel dipped further into company accounts. Harrington Enterprises began losing clients faster than Edward could replace them. And Reed Logistics, steady, reliable, was waiting to catch them. Years into his journey, Marcus received an invitation, the Chamber of Commerce Awards banquet. Reed Logistics had been nominated for Business of the Year. As Marcus walked into the glittering hall, heads turned. He wore a simple but sharp suit, Amira by his side. He shook hands with men and women who had once ignored him. But across the room, Edward Harrington stood, glaring. He whispered to his associates, "This is an insult. That man doesn't belong here." During the ceremony, Marcus's name was called. Applause thundered. He accepted the award with calm dignity, his voice steady. "I started with nothing but 1 van and a dream. But I refuse to let rejection define me. To every young person told they're not enough, build anyway. Your work will speak louder than prejudice." The hall erupted. Cameras flashed. Edward clenched his fists beneath the table. After the banquet, Edward cornered Marcus near the exit. "You think you've won something tonight? You're still a footnote. Harrington Enterprises is the legacy of this city. You'll never erase that." Marcus met his gaze. "Legacies built on injustice don't last, Mr. Harrington. I don't want to erase you. I want to prove there's another way." Edward stormed off, his face flushed. That night, he called Daniel, ordering him to step up and protect the family legacy. But Daniel, drunk and half asleep, muttered, "The legacy is already crumbling, father." By now, Reed Logistics had regional contracts. Warehouses sprang up, technology modernized operations, and young graduates joined the team. Marcus emphasized mentorship, hiring those overlooked by other companies. His mother, frail but smiling, visited the new headquarters. She touched the glass door etched with his company's name. "You carried my prayer into reality," she whispered. For Marcus, it was more than business. It was justice in motion. Inside Harrington Enterprises, disaster struck. An audit revealed massive discrepancies in the accounts. Millions missing, debts Daniel had hidden through falsified reports. The board erupted. Some demanded Edward step down. Others threatened lawsuits. Edward roared, "This company is mine. I built it. You will not strip it from me." But the truth could not be silenced. Banks withdrew support. Stockholders sold shares. Contracts shifted to Reed Logistics and other competitors. The empire Edward had spent a lifetime building was collapsing under the weight of pride and denial. One night, Daniel stumbled into Marcus's office building, drunk and desperate. Marcus, startled, offered him water. Daniel slurred, You took everything. My father's empire, his pride. And now, they want me to pay. Marcus frowned. Daniel, your father's choices, and your own, brought you here. I didn't take anything. I built what he said I never could. Daniel laughed bitterly, tears streaking his face. You don't understand. They're coming for me. And only you can stop it. Marcus stared, confused. What do you mean? Daniel staggered out before answering, leaving Marcus with unease. Days later, headlines blared, Edward Harrington's son under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. Photographs showed Daniel in handcuffs, escorted by police. Edward's face appeared in the background, pale with fury and shame. Marcus held the paper in his hand, stunned. The man who had once denied him work now faced public humiliation, not by Marcus's hand, but by his own bloodline. And soon, Marcus would be forced to make a choice that would define his legacy. Morning sunlight poured through the blinds of Reed Logistics headquarters. The hum of phones, keyboards, and delivery schedules filled the air. But Marcus sat at his desk frozen, staring at the morning paper. Front page, Harrington heir arrested, fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy allegations. The photo was damning, Daniel Harrington, pale, hair disheveled, hands cuffed as officers led him past reporters. Behind him, Edward Harrington scowled, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. Marcus laid the paper down slowly. He could still hear Edward's words from years ago, "Someone like you has no place here." Now the empire that once rejected him was splashed across headlines for corruption. But Marcus felt no joy. Only unease. Because this was not the end, it was the beginning of something larger. In the Harrington boardroom, chaos reigned. Board members shouted, some demanding Edward step aside, others blaming Daniel. Investors threatened lawsuits. Edward slammed his fists on the table. This is nothing but a witch hunt. My son is innocent. Harrington Enterprises is not collapsing, it's under attack. But the evidence mounted. Bank records, falsified documents, shadow accounts, all tied to Daniel. Even loyal allies began to back away. Edward's voice cracked with desperation. We will fight this. I will fight this. But for the first time, the once untouchable titan looked powerless. While Harrington fought lawsuits, Reed Logistics thrived. Marcus's reputation as ethical and reliable made him the natural choice for fleeing clients. Every week, new contracts arrived. Warehouses expanded. Technology improved. Workers who had once been overlooked by Harrington were now trained and respected at Reed Logistics. Amira walked into Marcus's office one evening, smiling. Do you realize what's happening? You're becoming the empire they never wanted you to be. Marcus looked out the window at his fleet of trucks lined in the lot, each bearing his name. I didn't want an empire. I wanted a chance. But if building this means others will never suffer what I did, then maybe it's worth it. Daniel sat in a jail cell, his world reduced to concrete walls and a thin cot. The arrogance that once cloaked him was gone, replaced by trembling hands and sleepless eyes. When Marcus visited, urged by Amira to show compassion, Daniel broke down. "They'll destroy me," he whispered. "The prosecutors, the creditors, even my father. I was never strong enough to carry the legacy." "You were right, Reed. You built your own. I destroyed mine." Marcus studied him. For years, Daniel represented privilege without accountability. Now he was a broken man. "Your choices led you here, Daniel," Marcus said quietly. "But you're still young. Redemption doesn't start in a boardroom. It starts in here." He tapped his chest. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, Marcus saw not an enemy, but a man crushed by the weight of expectations. News of Marcus's visit reached Edward, and it ignited his fury. He stormed into Marcus's office days later, his presence as sharp as ever. "You think you can play savior to my son? You think sitting by his cell makes you better than me?" Marcus met his glare calmly. "No, Mr. Harrington. I don't think I'm better. I think I made different choices." Edward leaned in, his voice venomous. "You don't belong in the same sentence as me. I built an empire. You're nothing but a parasite feeding on my losses." Marcus's voice was steady. "If respecting workers and honoring contracts makes me a parasite, then maybe that's what this city needs." Edward's face flushed crimson. He left with a warning, "This isn't over. I'll bury you before I let Reed Logistics replace Harrington Enterprises." But deep down, Edward knew, his empire was already crumbling. As lawsuits unfolded, the public shifted its view. Workers who had once been silent began sharing stories: unpaid wages, discrimination, intimidation. A former Harrington driver stood on a local news broadcast: "We were treated like tools, not people. Reed Logistics gave me a second chance. Harrington gave me nothing." Stories multiplied. Protests formed outside Harrington headquarters. Signs read, "Justice for Workers," and "No More Harrington Exploitation." The once respected Harrington name now drew anger, not admiration. One evening, Marcus sat in his office staring at a proposal on his desk. A group of investors had offered to help Reed Logistics acquire Harrington Enterprises outright. Amira placed her hand on his shoulder. "This could end them. Everything he denied you, the crown of the industry, it's right here." Marcus hesitated. "But at what cost? Do I become what he was? Is this about revenge, or justice?" The choice weighed heavily. From his cell, Daniel wrote Marcus a letter. His handwriting was shaky. "If Reed Logistics takes Harrington, save the workers. Don't punish them for my father's arrogance or my failures. They deserve better. If my fall means their rise, let it be so." Marcus read it 3 times, the words pressing into him. For the first time, a Harrington had acknowledged the truth. Edward wasn't done. Desperate, he called in political favors, bribed allies, and staged a press conference. Cameras flashed as he declared, "Harrington Enterprises will rise again. These accusations are lies. This so-called businessman, Marcus Reed, is nothing but an opportunist exploiting my family's pain." But mid-speech, a group of former Harrington employees walked on stage, holding signed testimonies. Their voices shook as they spoke of discrimination, abuse, and unpaid labor. The press erupted. Edward's face fell. For the first time, he was exposed not just in court, but before the world. That night, Edward sat alone in his mansion, staring at portraits of his ancestors. His empire was gone. His son was in jail. His wife, Eleanor, had left the city in shame. He poured himself a drink, whispering to the empty room, "How did it come to this?" The answer was simple. Pride. Prejudice. Denial. The following morning, Marcus received a call. Harrington Enterprises had filed for bankruptcy. Reporters swarmed Reed Logistics, demanding a statement. Workers pleaded for Marcus to take over the contracts. Investors pushed him toward acquisition. Marcus stood at the window, staring out at the city skyline. The empire that once humiliated him now lay at his feet. But if he accepted, it meant inheriting not just contracts, but the scars Harrington left behind. The question burned in his chest: would Marcus claim the empire that once rejected him, or build something entirely new? The city woke to headlines no one thought they'd see. Harrington Enterprises declares bankruptcy. An empire once untouchable, once the very definition of power, had crumbled overnight. Trucks sat idle in warehouses. Workers stood in limbo, uncertain of their future. Contracts hung in the air, waiting for someone strong enough to claim them. And all eyes turned to Marcus Reed. At Reed Logistics headquarters, reporters crowded the lobby, their voices rising in waves. "Mr. Reed, will you acquire Harrington? What do you say to those who call you the new king of logistics? Is this revenge?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Instead, he retreated to his office. The skyline stretched beyond his window, glittering in the afternoon sun. He closed his eyes, remembering the young man who once sat across from Edward Harrington, humiliated, told he wasn't fit to belong. Now, fate had placed the empire at his feet. But with it came a question that weighed heavier than any rejection ever had: what would justice look like now? Amira paced the office. "Marcus, this is your chance to rewrite the system. If you acquire Harrington, you're not just winning, you're erasing the legacy of injustice that empire stood for." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "But does taking their name mean carrying their sins too? I built Reed Logistics on respect, on fairness. Do I risk staining it by absorbing Harrington's collapse?" Amira's eyes softened. "Then don't carry their sins. Transform them. Make Harrington's fall the beginning of something better." Meanwhile, Edward Harrington sat in the ruins of his office. Dust coated the desks, papers scattered like fallen leaves. The once proud walls echoed with silence. He stared at a letter from the bankruptcy court, his hand trembling. The Harrington name, the dynasty his ancestors built, was finished. His reflection in the dark glass window seemed like a stranger. Wrinkles carved deeper by rage, eyes hollow from defeat. When reporters shoved microphones at him outside the courthouse, he spat bitter words. "This city betrayed me. They'll regret bowing to Reed. He will never be what I was." But the public had already turned. His words carried no weight anymore. In the courtroom, Daniel Harrington faced sentencing. The judge's voice was stern as charges of fraud and embezzlement were read. Daniel's eyes flickered toward the gallery, where Marcus sat silently. For a moment, shame and gratitude battled in his gaze. When asked if he had final words, Daniel spoke softly. "I was born into privilege but never taught responsibility. I hurt workers, I hurt clients, I hurt this city. I ask forgiveness not for me, but for those my failures harmed. And I thank the man who once stood outside our doors, denied dignity, for showing me what real leadership looks like." Gasps filled the room. Reporters scribbled furiously. Edward's face turned red with fury. But Marcus remained still, a quiet strength radiating from his silence. Daniel was sentenced to years in prison. Yet his words marked a shift. The Harrington heir had acknowledged the truth. Weeks later, Marcus called a press conference. The hall was packed: workers, clients, reporters, even skeptics who had once doubted him. He stepped to the podium, calm and poised. The Reed Logistics logo glowed behind him. "I was once turned away from opportunity. Told I wasn't the right image for success. But I refused to let rejection define me. I built Reed Logistics not on power, but on principles. Today, Harrington Enterprises has collapsed. But its workers, its drivers, its staff, they are not my enemies. They are victims of a system built on arrogance and prejudice." He paused, the crowd hushed. "So I will not acquire Harrington to erase them. I will welcome their workers into Reed Logistics. Every driver, every dispatcher, every staff member who still believes in honest work will find a place here. We will not inherit Harrington's sins. We will transform them into opportunity. The hall erupted in applause. Workers wiped tears. Some embraced. The message was clear: Marcus's victory was not revenge. It was redemption. News outlets broadcast the speech nationwide. Headlines read: Reed Logistics offers jobs to former Harrington employees. From rejection to redemption, Marcus Reed reshapes industry. The public hailed him not just as a businessman, but as a symbol of justice fulfilled. Talk shows replayed his words. Community leaders praised him. Parents told their children his story as proof that dignity and perseverance could triumph over hate. Edward Harrington watched the broadcasts from his now empty mansion. Curtains drawn, glasses of unfinished whiskey scattered on the table. For the first time, he had no control, no power, no empire. He muttered to himself, "That boy, he stole everything." But deep down, Edward knew the truth. Marcus hadn't stolen. Edward had destroyed himself. Pride and prejudice had been his undoing. He faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms, "Don't be another Harrington." Months later, Reed Logistics became the largest logistics company in the region, not because of Harrington's downfall, but because of Marcus's vision. Workers thrived, communities grew stronger, and contracts spread nationally. At the opening of a new training facility, Marcus stood with Amira by his side, his mother in a wheelchair beside him. She clutched his hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Marcus looked out at the young men and women entering the facility, ready to learn, ready to work. Many were people who had once been rejected, overlooked, dismissed. Now, they had a future. Marcus addressed them with quiet strength. Justice is not revenge. It is transformation. When they shut the doors in your face, build your own. When they say you don't belong, prove them wrong with your actions, not your anger. The Harringtons of this world will fall. But dignity endures. The room stood in ovation. Cameras flashed. And Marcus's story became part of a larger truth: every struggle can become strength. And so we ask you. If you were Marcus, standing at the door of rejection, what would you have done? Would you fight for dignity, or walk away in silence? His story reminds us, the systems built on prejudice eventually collapse. And when they do, it is those who endured, who fought with patience and resilience, who rise to build something better. If Marcus's journey inspired you, leave a comment below. Share your story of struggle turned into strength. And don't forget to subscribe to Echoes of Black Struggles, where the voices of resilience, justice, and transformation will never be silenced. Because no matter the struggle, victory is always possible.